Thank you very much. I would like to first of all thank the Russian Armenian University for hosting us, Professor Darvinyan. I would like to thank Dr. Okunev for his very supportive role through the IPSA, and I would like to thank Dr. Miriyan for his excellent organization and assistance with this event. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bill, or Vassilis Kappis as my Greek name is. I'm the Deputy Director and the Lecturer for the Center for Security and Intelligence Studies of the University of Buckingham. This presentation is regarding the grand strategy of small states, so it's a rather evolved presentation from the original idea, which was to focus on one specific case study. Let me start. The contribution, this presentation is in essence mirroring my chapter in Greek for the time being in the recently published volume by my good friend and colleague Dr. Petros Savinis from Cyprus. This is an edited volume on the security and defense of small states with a focus on Cyprus. And my first chapter was a little bit more general, talking about grand strategies in small states. Now, a few definitions. I won't bore you with many details. You can see the definition by Paul Kennedy on grand strategy, which is informed by prior contributions in the field. You can see the definition by Barry Posen. It's in very general terms, grand strategy is the theory about how the state can produce security for itself. And Nina Silov describes grand strategy very neatly when she says that grand strategy is long-term in its vision, holistic in its treatment of all instruments of national power, and important in its focus on the most consequential interests. So essentially, we're looking, when we talk about grand strategy, we're looking at the highest level of strategy, what a state wishes to achieve for itself in the international or the regional system if it's a small state. But we're looking at the vision, at where the state is, what sort of challenges and opportunities it is facing, and where it wishes to go in the future. Of course, much like every conception of strategy, strategy means both means and ends. Okay, so grand strategic means and grand strategic goals. The terms national strategy or national security strategy are oftentimes used in the same context, meaning grand strategy. Sometimes, however, grand strategy is confused with foreign policy and diplomacy. Now, oftentimes also with military strategy as well. So we have to be entirely clear from the get-go that grand strategy is much wider, much greater in its scope than foreign policy and military strategy. Actually, foreign policy and military strategy are themselves components of grand strategy. Now, what are the elements of grand strategy? Essentially three: military, economic, diplomatic strategy. Some authors, some analysts would also suggest that soft power and intelligence are also components of grand strategy, but this is a highly contested position. I would say that intelligence and soft power inform the main three components of grand strategy, but they're not separate components per se. So, what are the main features of grand strategy? It's formulated at the highest level. So, it's formulated in the United States by the White House, in the United Kingdom by the government, by the Prime Minister's office, and it informs domestic policies so that they can be consistent with the nation's grand strategy. Imagine, for example, a state whose trade policy is not consistent with its grand strategy. Imagine if the grand strategy of the United Kingdom is to approach former colonies, for example, like India, at the same time setting up high trade barriers to Indian products. One policy undermines the grand strategic goals. So one of the main rationales is that grand strategy is diffused, is trickled down to the rest of the state in order so that policies are consistent with the grand strategic goals. So the success requires compatibility across the three pillars. The economic, military, the diplomatic component, they would have to work hand in hand. They would have to be in harmony with one another. Case studies of grand strategies are very well known. I can give you a very short example. The Retrenchment grand strategy of the United States during the Obama years. A number of foundations, a number of main pillars were present. First of all, reducing the footprint of the United States from places like Iraq and Afghanistan, because there was a military fatigue, really, stretching out the resources, and the loss of reputation was quite substantial. I think it's fair to say that the Afghanistan and Iraq campaigns had not really gone well for the superpower. The second pillar is pivot to Asia. We've got Hillary Clinton's 2011 article in Foreign Affairs, if I'm not mistaken, that signaled this American intention to focus itself on the Asia Pacific, which is absolutely crucial for US interests. The third pillar, recovery and reforms. Lehman Brothers in 2008, the biggest financial crisis in the United States since the Great Depression. There has to be a focus on getting back the American economic and social machine to work properly in order to produce security for the United States and beyond. Fourth pillar, emphasis on allies and multilateralism. A clean break from the previous administration and its rift with allies and friends. And of course, improving the global image of the United States, which had been severely tarnished by Abu Ghraib, by instances in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere as well. So this happened as a concerted strategy involving all the components of the American policy-making apparatus. And we can see that the shift of aerial and maritime resources in particular took place in a gradual but certainly stable and highly visible manner. And of course, in Europe, we witnessed firsthand what it means for the United States to be gradually reducing its military footprint. We saw this in the case of Ukraine, which is a highly, again, debatable case, but one could not anticipate to see the United States not reacting at all, or almost at all, in the Arab Spring, the wave of protests and revolutions that swept the Middle East and North Africa. With a minor exception of Libya, but Libya was a French-initiated international intervention. So, can small states have grand strategies? Small versus grand, it sounds contradictory from the get-go. In my chapter, I have a number of case studies as examples, and I use the small definition in a relational manner. And I explain how asymmetrical strategic interactions can actually characterize the smallness of a state. So a state can be small, but in geopolitics, it only matters if the state is small vis-a-vis one other state or other states in a certain region. So it's all about interactions. I'm not considered a very tall player by basketball standards, but I consider myself relatively tall otherwise. So it really has to do with the actors that you're interacting with. And I'm using Singapore as a case study to showcase how small states, and Singapore doesn't even have a proper runway for its airplanes to take off, yet managed to articulate a very cohesive vision for its future. And during its independence, it was far from certain that Singapore would continue on in the Malay Peninsula as an independent state. I have a few graphs and numbers on the defense spending of small states, more specifically the defense burden, but I would like to directly take you to these final observations articulated in my chapter. Why specifically small states and grand strategy? What is so important about small states and grand strategy compared to great powers? First of all, they have to maximize their impact in international politics with very few resources. A great power can have embassies in 200 states. A small power can have embassies in a small number of states. It has to maximize its impact. It has to be very strategic and cautious about where it sends its diplomatic missions. The same goes for its military planning. Few weapons, few defense systems, they have to be well thought of. The second is the disproportionate cost of strategic mistakes for small powers. Great powers can afford to make huge blunders. The Afghan and Iraqi wars cost, according to the calculation, $2 trillion to the US economy. The United States was able to recover. If a small state undertakes a strategic blunder, it may mean its annihilation. It may mean loss of territory, it may mean loss of independence altogether. The third reason is that small states have oftentimes a small window of opportunity in international politics to capitalize on certain developments and gain substantial benefits. So they need to have a grand strategy which is adaptable, perceives geopolitical shifts in a very swift manner, because the opportunity for a small state will be there for just a small window of time. The final reason, small states should have published grand strategies in order to avoid, to the best of their ability, of course, intervention by political agents, by external powers, by tying one's hands publicly. Small states make it very difficult for foreign agents or for domestic agents who are informed by foreign actors to hijack and change their policies. And this is something we've seen very often in Europe and elsewhere. I would like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kappis, a lot. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Sarkis Karaguezian from the Center for Diplomatic and Strategic Studies from Paris.
Dear professors and dear colleagues, first let me thank you for the organization and the chance and the opportunity that you gave us to attend this conference. And the same concept, geopolitics of small states, my paper will be based on why small states do matter in international politics. In the international relations literature, there is a tendency to focus on the great powers. As we say, they set the scene, and the small states have to adjust, and therefore their different national political characteristics, values, and preferences are not seen as having a strong influence. So being small is seen as inherent disadvantage in international politics. But are there advantages? So let's first define what is a small state. Usually we all define it by size, less than 10 million inhabitants. But with time, the concept has changed to be more explained as a state that has a deficit of power due to its limited ability to mobilize resources. So it's more the ability to remain autonomous while exerting influence. So having both will offer you the ability to use and apply offensive strategies. So by definition, small states cannot do that. What they can do is to choose between either favoring autonomy, which will lead to a defensive strategy, or influence, which is more about alignment. So if you favor autonomy, you will very likely adopt a policy of neutrality. And in case you exert influence, that means you have to join an alliance by tying your face to greater power. It is very important from academic and theoretical point of view to take under consideration the special characteristic of each small state. One of the biggest challenges is to face an aggressive neighbor. The biggest opportunity is the fact being located in a region of great geopolitical importance with a lot of problems. So special characteristics of small states like geography and political history are very important. In general, as we see the complexity of the current international system, where there is violation of basic human rights and civil liberties that creates crises and challenges, which offers some opportunities to small states, like taking multilaterally to play the role of a negotiator or to enhance regional cooperation. So actually this is relative. It is not only the size. It is economic potential, GDP, military resources, and network of friendships. So it depends who you are compared to. It is a big mistake to completely underestimate small states in international politics. So how do small states survive and succeed in such a complex order despite their weaknesses? In the beginning of the 21st century, small states face new opportunities and challenges on the international scene. If we take a look at the current international order, I think we see three important major trends. First one is abdication of the United States. The US is no longer taking the same kind of responsibility as previously for the development and maintenance of global international institutions. Second trend is the rise of China in the context of decline of the US, creating a risk of no hegemony, taking global responsibility, and the risk of great power conflict and increased competition between superpowers. And third, we see the decline of all institutions by being slow and having problems in solving the challenges that we face. So concerning small states, this creates three risks. The first one is marginalization. For example, not being one of the burning spots in the world that great powers zoom in, then you'll be forgotten as a small state. Risk of parallel election by agreeing on goals, but competing to achieve it. Incentive to go it alone rather than cooperating. And third, risk of overload. Too many challenges and demands from the great powers where small administrations, diplomacies, and militaries cannot simply do it. So what could be our best solutions? Let's focus on three aspects. The first one is to be a problem solver, as we all know that the great powers set the agenda in international affairs. So small states should think how they could cooperate in order to make the problem solving where they can see their interest in. The second one is defining what to negotiate and what is non-negotiable. The third and finally is taking advantage of being weak and small by taking the role of chief negotiator and getting the right position in negotiations. So what kind of initiative taken to enhance the small countries? We live in a changing world where the whole global system is in transition. Implementing a clear foreign policy and a clear vision regarding the region where wrong strategies will lead a region of instability, prosperity, and opportunities, and it will create a region with a lot of problems, difficulties, and challenges. So I want to highlight more in geography, especially when having a difficult neighbor that challenges your sovereignty, where you don't share same language or values, forming a huge barrier to economic cooperation. So focusing on economic diplomacy, for example, Denmark, they succeed by gathering sectors and taking point of departure in different fields, energy, water, health, and by engaging in dialogue with countries and governments on common issues, and by forming platforms for cooperation, and also engaging in private sectors. So the absence of discussion of the regional cooperation will let us witness the importance and the added value of any cooperation on different levels, security, defense, health, trade, research, and innovation. This is a clear indication of the importance of the cooperation. A good example that I'm gonna hit to is the pandemic and how it transformed the international relations diplomacy strategy. Things are getting more challenging in the presence of pandemic situation and how facing it. It is very clear that the pandemic situation highlighted the importance of the cooperation between countries, especially by applying a joint medical plans or vaccination one in order to counter this kind of challenge by setting new rules, which is international wise, for traveling in the sake of protection and safety of citizens. So the vaccination plan was a success, a real proof that cooperation is must, especially on an international level, promoting stability, more extended international cooperation, especially when it comes dealing with humanitarian crisis. So as I noticed, somewhat small countries did better than bigger ones. Greece was a good example by implementing preventive measures in slowing and minimizing the spread of the virus with the limited resources and recovering from an economic crisis. It was definitive that intense cooperation was a real help. So the pandemic showed us the importance of the states to invest in emergency readiness and long-term strategies on issues related to health by investing in science and scientific research. Another key lesson is the need to invest in technology and digitalization. From the foreign policy perspective, the pandemic has confirmed the value of multilateralism. On a regional level, working with neighbors like UAE, that was essential to face such a threat. So brief comments in terms of summary, I can point those small states have different characteristics and conditions, but also have shared interests and solutions that often take the form of cooperation, showing a continued interest and importance of the multilateral institutions as an arena for cooperation and platform for influence. And I see important also to focus on militarism on networks that can grow between regions. Finally, taking advantage of the freedom of action by owning a fairly rule-based order and illustration of how much small states actually do and how successful they can be in many ways. So in a world driven by open economy, free trade, mobility of human talent, advanced technology, the most successful countries are the small ones. It's a matter of being conscious of the size that you have and which possibilities that gives you and which are the pitfalls. So you have the possibility of being agile and taking very swift decisions and to play on different agendas by being extremely focused and forming alliances to make an impact. I do believe that meaning of power has changed. It's something that we need exercise when we have to address, and by default the world has become multilateral. I do believe that small states have a role to play in the current international politics. They can create an atmosphere and environment of moral urgency. So the small states who believe they matter big. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a couple of presentations online. I'm not sure that Dr. Wiegand is with us.
And so far it's proven to be that. I also, Dr. Igor Okunev, want to thank you, not least because as long as people were promoting books, this is his, and it's really good.
Wow, thanks.
I appreciated receiving it when it arrived in the post after I ordered it. It took a while, but I have used it several times already, as it's a good reference. Anyway, I'll get right down to sharing my slides. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to be talking about maritime zones because it is of particular interest to small states simply because there are about 80 or so states that have more water than land. And the majority of these are smaller ones, island states, some small coastal states. But they're territorial sea entitlements. are greater than the amount of land they have. So I wanted to explore what is going to be happening in the future as global warming promotes the rising sea level, and what is that going to mean to states? If you look at this, this is just sort of a schematic diagram of the current situation for an island state, a small island state. You have the land, you have a territorial sea that goes out to 12 nautical miles. This is international law under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea from 1982. The territorial sea goes out 12 nautical miles, and states have complete sovereignty in their territorial sea. So it's an extension of their sovereignty on land. Then they have exclusive economic zones where they control economic activity that normally goes out to 200 miles, or if they are, if they have a continental shelf, it can go out to 350 miles if the shelf is out that far. Now, the zones, the maritime zones of states, the territorial sea, the exclusive economic zone, also an in-between one called the contiguous zone, which I won't get into today for lack of time, are all measured out from baselines. And the baselines are where the land meets the sea at low tide, and under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, states report these baselines and notify the United Nations, which acts as a repository of the coordinates and where the maritime zones are of all the states. So what happens when the sea level rises? Well, the first picture is what you just saw. It's the current situation. But the second picture, the one in the middle, shows what can happen if the sea level rises, the land becomes submerged. One option is that the 12-mile limit to the territorial sea and the exclusive economic zone move inward and retain their dimensions relative to the land. The second option is for the outer limits of the 12-mile limit and the exclusive economic zone to stay where they are. It is being debated in international law circles right now what should happen, and these are the two primary options. The first option, moving the baselines inward as the sea encroaches on the land, that makes the entire sovereign territory of the state smaller because the land shrinks and the territorial sea around it therefore shrinks as well because it goes out only 12 nautical miles. The exclusive economic zone shrinks also. So essentially, a small state becomes smaller and a medium-sized state may become a small state. It is something that is of great concern to small states that are already using for fishing and other things or their exclusive economic zones to the limit simply because they have more water than land, in the case of island states in particular. And what this would mean is that water they're currently using for fishing and other economic activity and controlling in terms of licensing arrangements, some of the outer water may no longer be under their control if this is the option that is that prevails. The other option is to keep the baselines exactly where they are. The sea encroaches on the land, so the land becomes smaller, but the outer limits of the outer limits of the territorial sea, where the state exercises sovereignty, stays the same, and the outer limits of the exclusive economic zone stays the same. So these are the two options that are that have kind of emerged with this problem. What are the challenges and opportunities that arise from this? First, for particularly small, low-lying states, there's the possibility that they might become completely submerged over time. And one of the questions is, under discussion already, should these remain states? Because there has been a tradition in international law that has become solidified over time that states depend on having land territory. Everything derives from that. The fact that you have territorial waters is because you have land. The fact that you have airspace is because you have land below it. So what happens if you no longer have land? Can you remain a state? This is a matter of great debate in international law circles right now. I am on the International Law Association Committee on sea level rise, and I can tell you that it's pretty evenly split. You know, the opinions on whether a state whose land disappeared should remain a state under international law and with all the obligations and benefits of being a state. Another challenge is migration of the people. If your land shrinks, much less disappears, you may have to make arrangements, and that can propel you into relations with other states that you may not have had previously. Already, one small island state in the Pacific, Kiribati, has leased land on an island in Fiji for its population if it becomes necessary at some point in the future. In terms of the opportunities, those are rather interesting because international law takes sometimes quite a while to develop, and it congeals around what states do. Well, in 2018, there were 8 island states in the Pacific that agreed to what was called the Dinah Commitment, in which they declared that their existing baselines would remain in perpetuity. On August 6th of this year, there was a declaration by the Pacific Island Forum, which consists of 18 states, that said, in part, that the duly established baselines that already have been notified to the United Nations Secretary General under terms of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea should stay in place. They said, as part of their declaration, we do not intend to review and update baselines and outer limits of our maritime zones as a course of climate change-related sea level rise. Well, once state practice begins to exist and solidify, and as we see here, from the 8 states in the Dinah Commitment to the 18 states in the Pacific Island Forum, it's already spreading. This can have kind of a snowball effect and become something of an international regime in the sense that Krasner talks about them, state practice that basically more and more states adhere to. Then it becomes very difficult to dislodge from the realm of international law, because states will, you already have a number of states that will oppose it. It provides an opportunity, really, by acting early, and they're acting early because they're the most effective, to influence the development of international law as it affects all states. What these small states do in regard to their maritime zones and their baselines may affect what large states may be obliged to do in the future. So this is an area where small states can actually have some strength as a result of the climate change and the rising sea level. It also strengthens the principle of the permanence of state boundaries, and it raises new questions for the another legal principle that I mentioned a moment ago, which is that the land dominates the sea. It may be that the sea comes to have a greater weight relative to the land in international law and how it treats states. And when it happens at the instigation of small states, it can affect and influence all states. So I will end there because we have time limits, but I just wanted to give a brief explanation of how the sea level rise can create these situations for maritime zones that offer opportunities as well as challenges for the small states. And what happens this week in Glasgow, Scotland at COP26 may have an influence on some of this stuff. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for a great presentation. Let me give the floor to Ruzanna Hayrapetova, PhD candidate at the Department of World Politics and International Relations at Russian Armenian University. Please.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for my alma mater, Russian Armenian University, and my colleagues, Ruzanna and Igor Okunev, for this opportunity to present you my ideas about niche diplomacy of small states in geopolitics. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Modern trends in world system lead to redefinition the concept of geopolitics. These trends are characterized by a shift away from approaches of landscape and geography, and as a result of this trend became geopolitics that help research that small countries also can be a great part of international system. Here you can see the main points of meta-geopolitics of foundations. It's make it possible to examine the effects of small countries, not looking at the context of their small territory, lack of resource, or small military capabilities. Meta-geopolitics turns its attention to social issues, health, domestic politics, economics, environment, science, and human potential, also security and diplomacy. And let me say on the last point, international diplomacy. Here we can see that possibilities of non-traditional diplomacy can help in this study, because public diplomacy help many countries to provide their point of view, their lifestyles, their values. And but by the way, it's also not stable, because COVID-19 also made at this point favoring digital diplomacy over public diplomacy. Nevertheless, it may be difficult for small states provide full-fledged public diplomacy or concept of small states as smart power or soft power, and small countries may not have enough resources to do it. In this context, small countries, small states can turn their attention to niche diplomacy. Niche diplomacy and public diplomacy have some similarities, like soft approach, wide range of tools, and participants' openness to communication. But the term niche diplomacy defines specialized activities to concentrate their resources in one sphere to have great return, rather than dealing with everything at once. And in this context, I will stay at the case of Armenia, and Armenia now is going through difficult period in its domestic and foreign policy, which brings the issue of genocide back into an agenda. In this context, it's an opportunity for Armenia to reconsider its position and update of ideas on the prevention of genocide. There has already been attempt in Armenia politics to take on the role, so-called HAP, to unite countries against genocide and its consequences. This idea was promoted in the context of event dedicated to 100th anniversary of Armenian genocide in the Ottoman Empire. Armenia always have taken initiative to prevent genocide in Armenian initiative resulted in the adoption of Convention of Prevention and Punishment of Genocide and the resolution of prevention of genocide. As a result, December 9 was declared as the day of adoption of Convention to Prevent Crime. These kind of results are important milestones in international relations, like humanitarian and peacekeeping initiatives of Canada and Norway lead to Ottawa process and Oslo process. Equal attractive examples of shaping influence to middle and great states through niche diplomacy, the nuclear-free initiative of South Africa and Kazakhstan. Turning to the question what Armenia needs to do with its niche, it's necessary to address the most important point, its population and Armenian people as huge motivated human resources. As a result of new diplomacy is a product that could be sold to both to audience of their countries, also to international audience, and genocide is a fight against genocide is something that will support the Armenian diaspora and Armenian population itself. Armenian people should be an important motivation component of this niche, certainly with the support of state. Coordinated work and constant targeting will lead to fix this niche, because there are some examples where of great examples when in 2015 Armenia organized a global forum against crime of genocide, which was attended by more than 50 countries. Or in 2019, Armenia partnered with the Global Network of Action Against Mass Crimes. Armenia also takes part in an event commemorating genocide commitment over the past few decades. But there is a risk not bringing the Armenian point of view to the world because of periodicity of actions, which are most often limited in April each year. paying attention to the issues of an attractive project, it's necessary to touch open the image of Armenia in the context of its niche. Armenia is limited to image of a victim of genocide and wars, but in order to be more influenced in international relations, necessary to form image of country and people who has recovered from horrors and tragedy. The new approach can no longer be image of forgot-me-not, that gathering Armenian diaspora and Armenian population only by idea of bright future. It should be more global. For example, it should be modern, that is promoted through offline and online platforms. For example, a notable example is mobile exhibition with presentation of textual and visual materials to the general public by the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute. And at the end, I want to say that it's possible to pay attention to influence of niche diplomacy. Always allows small countries to influence geopolitical process in their way if they use their problem not like by their negative size and became smaller, but be bigger, but their great idea to present to the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Lord. If we have any questions, we have an opportunity to ask them for all the presenters. Do we have any questions online? Кто-то в чате задавал вопросы? Well, I would like to ask a question for all the presenters, and would ask to answer briefly, to underline your idea. Well, what's the particular difference for small states international strategy in comparison to big states? What I've heard a lot, to be sovereign, to be independent, to be compatible, to find some new areas for development. So how you would underline your ideas? What are the particular areas in which small states agenda differs from big states?
As I mentioned before, you need to know how to compare yourself with others. So it's not about the style, as we say. So each state, I think, is different than others. It's about quality, what qualities you have that you can prove yourself being a strong and bigger state. And as I showed that the COVID-19 was the biggest proof that the bigger states couldn't do anything. They had much higher casualties, and till now they couldn't how to fix their or set their agendas to fix that. At the time where small states were moving faster and being more creative. The only problem is today, I want to shift this to the Middle East because that's the zone of confrontation that I study. If you see that having a lot of neighbors with conflicts won't give you the right chance to prove yourself. So, in a parallel than that, if you have a good neighbor, that will show you ability as a small state, being on international level. So, just to be in brief, it's a matter of where is your geopolitical location on the map. So even Armenia, if you look at Armenia, it is full of neighbors that cannot collaborate as it should be. So as we see the Armenian history, because I'm also half Armenian, going from the genocide, how they survived and struggled, they have good potential in life. But surrounding not defined. Unfortunately, today on the 21st century, we still see Armenia in a global war, which is that we should be ahead of that already. So it depends on your geopolitical position and how much you can get the chance to be a brilliant country or not. So comparing to that, so it depends on your location today.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Strauss, would you like to comment?
And I like the previous comment as well, so I wanted to just acknowledge that. But it's a good question. And I would say that one of the things that makes small states different than big states in terms of their international strategy can be seen in the agreements that I mentioned, and that is the agility of small states to act in their interest as a group more rapidly, perhaps because their interests are shared, perhaps because their interests are, as in the case of the rising sea level, existential interests. And the fact that the DLEP commitment in 2018 was followed so quickly by the Pacific Island Forum with more states, essentially all agreeing to the same thing very rapidly compared to, you can imagine 18 big states taking years to agree on something because of all of their multitude of interests at a greater level, geopolitically perhaps. Small states have the room to maneuver and can be more agile in their alliances with each other, in their pursuit of interests, and as a result of that, they can have some influence, as I was mentioning in my presentation. And that's a real asset for them.
Thanks, Ruzanna.
Thank you for your question. Thank you, my colleagues, for the comments. I think that small countries have enough opportunities to be interested in international relations, because when you're a great country, a great state, you understand what you have enough resource to create, use very success policy or strategy. But yeah, we understand we have some troubles sometimes, but small countries have this opportunity to understand what you have, to use it to be useful in this system, what you can do for this world, and how you can what you want to present this world. And it creates some interesting example like Armenia, like initiatives by Norway, Canada, Brazil, that use their small resources but great ideas, and to make small countries bigger. They not stay in their frontiers of small states.
Thank you. Let's make small states great again or once. Well, do we have any other questions? Oh, please. Take the microphone.
So there's an online question as well.
Okay, so was about online question? Okay. Please go ahead.
I'm not sure if you're talking to somebody in the room or to me, but I would take
yes,
the
please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Hilary. I'm a lecturer at King's College London. I have a question first to Major Sarkis Karaguezian. I apologize if I pronounced that not exactly precisely. I'm just curious about the statement that you made earlier. I can hear myself coming back on the sound. You made a statement that it is to achieve influence, small states should seek alignment. Whereas if they want to favor autonomy, then they're more likely to go for a neutral strategy. And my question is, why you make this distinction? Because in my work and the presentation I will make tomorrow, I argue that it's precisely because they are neutral that often small states can wield influence. And you gave the example in your presentation of small states serving as mediators and negotiators, which is a position of influence that they would not have if they were not neutral. So I wonder if I can push you a little bit on this distinction that you made. And if it's okay, I would also like to ask a quick question to Dr. Vassilis Kappis. I was really interested in your presentation because my doctoral research asked, can small states have a grand strategy? So I was very interested in your talk. And I know that you had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the Singapore case study, but I saw on your slide that you had Cyprus and the Sultanate of Oman, and I'm just curious whether in your research you argue that these two states have a grand strategy and what it is, or whether there were limitations that meant they could not act in the same way as Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Dr. Kappis left us. He's teaching now, as I understood. But we will pass your question to him, so please.
Okay, concerning your question, as I mentioned before, already I come from a country where there's a dispute between neighbor countries at some points. That's one example. Another example is also Armenia, which if you look at it, there's also a dispute to the surrounding countries. So being small sometimes is defined being weak. So in a matter to focus on that and to go ahead, we always focus on, in our studies, on diplomacy, which allow us to give a good solution by having good connections with neighbors. And not having that will give you a closed area or a log land that you won't be able to do any kind of maneuver. So I do believe in small states, but at the same time, I do agree that economic diplomacy is a must, especially with the surrounding countries. So alignment with others, it is necessary. And especially if sometimes you're a proxy of a superpower. So today we cannot still say that small states can verse great powers. So at some point you need a backbone, as we say, and a stronghold. So I see the alignment, especially in economic diplomacy, it is a must at some point before reaching at a level that you can have your own influence on yourself and on the others.
Thanks a lot. Well, I think we had an interesting discussion. I learned a lot. One of the things I learned that we have to plan another conference from Dr. Strauss' presentation on geopolitics of states without geography or without any land. So that could be really an interesting topic for the future, as those islands that could lose their land, but could still have sovereignty, and many other aspects of virtual states and so on. So thank you very much for your great presentation and great questions. Thanks a lot.